How do you go offshore if you don't have a lot of money? Commenters here on YouTube and on nomadcapitalist.com often ask Andrew, why don't you talk more to folks who are just starting out, people who have small incomes? How can they go where they're treated best as well? Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you why we don't do so much of that and share with you some of the challenges that folks who are just starting out do have today when they're going offshore. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you'd like to learn how Nomad Capitalist can help you, the 7- or 8-figure entrepreneur, go offshore, create a plan, execute that plan, learn more about us at nomadcapitalist.com. And a story that comes to my mind when I talk about why it's more challenging now to go offshore with a small income, or if you're just starting out, is the small Asian country of Bhutan. Now, if you want to visit Bhutan, you've got to do things that you don't have to do pretty much anywhere else on earth. Well, so many countries around the world are just allowing mass tourism to come in. Bhutan has said no. You have to go with a tour guide everywhere you go. You've got to stay in a luxury hotel, and you're going to pay us a fixed fee per person per day to cover all of that. It's the idea of low impact, high value tourism. And about a decade ago, Bhutan hired one of these fancy consulting companies. And every time I've talked to someone who hires one of these fancy consulting companies, they're always let down. But Bhutan was also let down because basically the consulting company said, just let everyone come in, sell cheap t-shirts at every corner, and you'll be very successful. Bhutan said, you know, we're not going to do that. We want the best tourists. Now, if you are just starting out in business, or if you don't have a lot of money, maybe you're making a low or mid 5-figure income, for example, even a 5-figure income, depending on where you're going, you can still go offshore. You can still go where you're treated best. You can still travel around the world. You can still bank overseas. You can still incorporate somewhere else. But a lot of the strategies that we talk about are increasingly expensive. And I'll give you an example. About 8 years ago, I went to Singapore as a tourist, and I was able to open an account at one of the big 3 Singapore banks. This is one of the most rock-solid banks in the world. It gave me access to the Singapore dollar. And the opening deposit, the minimum deposit, was a mere 1,000 Singapore dollars, which at the time was about $780 US. I still have that account to this day. Now the requirement to get that account is, if you find the right person, $50,000. Other accounts in Singapore that are open to non-residents generally start at $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 deposit, a far cry from the $1,000 that was required of me some time ago. And so what you've got is, across things like banks, second residences, and second passports, prices have gone up, criteria have gone up, and as countries get traction and as institutions get traction, they generally tend to follow a similar model to what Bhutan is. They say to themselves, why do we want to have 1 million bank accounts for non-residents that all require compliance in the era of FATCA for Americans, CRS, so the common reporting standard for pretty much everyone else? You know, why do we want to fill out this paperwork? Why do we want to be responsible? You know, governments are cracking down all around the world on things like money laundering. Why do we want the hassle of some guy who came from, Germany for a weekend to open a bank account, put $1,000 in, and we've got to handle all this liability and all this paperwork? Similarly, countries around the world are facing political pressure from their own citizens. Why are we letting so many people come in? Why are we letting them become residents? Why are we letting them become citizens? And so what I see is, for the strategies that work, it's becoming more and more difficult and more costly. Okay? If you are pretty much anyone but an American and you want to go overseas, you're going to need to open a new personal bank account offshore. Now, if you don't have a lot of money, we've talked about Georgia, we've talked about Armenia, Ecuador, Cambodia. There are places where you can go and open a bank account without much money at all, and sometimes relatively easily. Okay? And as you scale, you can certainly upgrade some of these more expensive accounts. But there are only so many places like that, and I fear that eventually some of those things will also become more difficult. Eventually, Georgia will start to raise its requirements, right? Countries tend to follow a pattern where they constantly are raising their requirements, okay? Company formation. You can set up an offshore company very cheaply. However, some of the cheapest offshore companies are the ones that really don't have much respectability to them. you can form your company in Belize or Seychelles. Good luck getting some kind of bank account for that, at least any kind of robust bank account that you would probably be comfortable with. And then when you're trying to move money around, you could have issues. There could be issues in your home country, the place where you're living. There's a lot of factors that you have to consider. And so, the cheapest things are things that probably will cost you more in the long run, actually, than just doing it and paying extra money to set it up. But, if you want to set up one of these more expensive companies, it might cost more money than it's worth. I mean, if you make $75,000 a year and your tax bill is, 15 grand, okay, going out and spending half that much just to set up a company may not be worth it. You might just want to pay the money, okay? So I'm not saying that if no matter what your income level is, no matter what your assets are, I'm not saying don't travel. I'm not saying don't go and open a personal bank account. I'm not saying don't live in other places in the world or take advantage of small entry-level investments that are available around the world. Maybe you get a bank account somewhere and you buy some local stocks or some local government bonds, or maybe eventually you save up and you buy a small home somewhere. That I'm all in favor of. But from the perspective of I want to substantially reduce or even eliminate my tax bill. I want to establish a high quality second residence in a country that I love. I want to obtain a second citizenship. Those things become more difficult. Even as the supply increases, we've seen in the Caribbean, there used to be 2 countries that offer citizenship by investment. Now there are 5. And yet they've basically got together and said, you know what, guys, let's not kill ourselves. Let's have a price floor. It's a $100,000 donation, which is where Dominica was when there were only 2, right? I don't see prices going down because there are so many more people who are interested. You've got so many more Chinese, Russians, Arabs, and now other countries where people are freaking out because some left-wing guy gets elected and they're worried what's going to happen to their assets. I've heard people in places like Mexico who are talking about wanting a second passport for the first time, and so that's going to add to the demand. And so with all this wealth going on out there in the world, that banker in Singapore might say, I have so many Chinese people who want to come and deposit, $500,000. Why am I wasting time with, this guy from London who wants to come and put in $1,000 or $5,000? It's just not worth it. This is what I'm telling folks, and it's very interesting because we started working with folks who are not Westerners. We started taking some select clientele from Russia, Ukraine, other countries in Eastern Europe, some folks from North African countries like Morocco and Egypt. And what I've seen is kind of a difference in Western versus Eastern, where in the Western world it's like, well, why wouldn't they want my money? And the answer is what I just told you. The answer is because they have much more money from other people and they only have so much bandwidth, right? I mean, it just becomes not worth it. I mean, in our business here at Nomad Capitalist, we work with 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs. If you've got a business that's established, it's up and running, you're making good money, $500,000, $1 million, something like that, or more, up into the 9 and 10 figures even. We've had folks. I'm one guy. I've got a small team. I can't help everyone because I believe in doing things holistically. All this stuff works together. Okay, and so I'm going to charge more than a guy who just churns out 5,000 new Seychelles companies every month. And I think the same philosophy applies to most of the desirable places in the offshore world. If you look at second residence programs, we've been talking about this for a long time. Some of the golden visa programs are raising their prices. Ireland's residence program raised their price. Other programs just say, we don't want this. We don't need to be in it. Canada left the game. US raised their price. UK leaves the game, comes back, raises their price. New Zealand rejects almost half the people who apply. They're just like, we don't need everybody. Okay? And so the bottom line is, doing this offshore stuff is not cheap. Okay? I'm from the United States, and you can set up an LLC, a limited liability company where I'm from, where I was an adult, lived as an adult in Arizona. It costs like 35 bucks. If you want to expedite it, it's 85 bucks. And if you live there and you want to be your own registered agent to receive any legal paperwork, you can do that. It's free. There's no other cost. I mean, you never pay again. It's 35 bucks and you're done, right? Now, obviously, what you're done with is you're now going to pay 40 or 50% income tax on all of your business profits, right? But, again, if you're running a $50,000 a year business, It may not be worth it to go through all the rigmarole of doing this offshore stuff. It may be worth living offshore if that's a lifestyle decision for you, and you can go and live in the places we talk about, lower your cost of living, and all that. But is it worth all the infrastructure to reduce your tax? Increasingly, I don't know, because this stuff is complicated. Tax rules are more complicated. Compliance is more complicated. And again, the small number of good offshore tax experts that I know in each country, they're not cheap because they're also inundated, and they've also, they raise their prices to meet demand. That's the way that things are going. I encourage everyone to go where they're treated best, to see the world, have a passport, even if, just your home country's passport, go out and see the world, find opportunities. And you know what? What I did was I said, hey, I was able to start a number of successful businesses in the United States. Let me go and travel around and find out what else I can do. Where else can I invest? Where else can I start a business? And I can tell you, your chances of having a successful high probability business somewhere else in a more tax favorable country are probably high. Certainly your chances of kind of having a portable location independent business while working from overseas are also high. But really for me, if you're not in the six-figure level, doing a total package of tax reduction and residence and citizenship and compliance and all that, it becomes challenging for all the reasons that I've mentioned. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.